It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com. All right, I'm really excited to share with you the new Blue Grit Police Testing and Hiring Guide that's live on the website. Really, this is the culmination of everything I've learned about police testing from the time I came in myself and had to figure out trial by fire what it was that agencies wanted. At the same time, how to showcase my best version of myself, right? It's not about being something that you're not, but it's about understanding each stage in the game so you can present the best way. In my guide, I go in everything about the hiring landscape right now, how to develop your mindset, what to expect, and how to show up. So it's about knowing yourself well, like identifying strengths, weaknesses, how to conceptualize this, how to articulate this, and then going into the test itself. So written, physical components, interviews, everything that we're looking for there, the background, what that entails, polygraph, psych eval, medical, what these things all are, what they're trying to yield or determine, and then how you can make sure that you are showing up to be effective so you're not wasting your time, stress, money, all the angst of waiting for this extremely long-term process to go through. So just show up the right way, your best way the first time. Again, you can find that at bluegritwellness.com. Go to the shop, so it's bluegritwellness.com/shop.
You know, there's a lot of effort to teaching officers like how to better help others with their mental health or how to better help, the community and stuff like that. And all that's great and totally necessary, but there isn't a lot for us, as I said earlier.
Man, if you feel like you're that positive person or you want to be, but it's so pervasive in your, in your roll call or your squad meetings where that one person, literally all they got to do is walk in the room and everyone's tanked. Like, you got to bring it extra.
Someone doesn't access it on their own. It's usually someone that cares about them holding their hand and saying, let's do this together.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Shawn Barnes. Shawn is a prior law enforcement officer. We're going to get into his career. He's also working with Stronger Families now, so that's I'm super excited to talk about, learn about, and be able to feature as a resource for first responder families. But without further ado, Shawn, thanks for coming on the show, man.
No, absolutely. When you and I connected on LinkedIn, I didn't at all know even that you were doing the podcast thing, and it was like a real pleasant surprise to kind of stumble on that. And particularly the niche that you have, in like officer wellness. I mean, that's just such a overlooked issue. It's getting talked about more, but it has been such an overlooked issue for a long time. And so appreciate you, man.
No, yeah, thank you, man. And for the listeners, by the time this comes out, we'll already have this kind of off-duty consideration panel. We're talking to you about coming on the panel and like schedules being what they are. I know that you would have had a lot of insight for specifically like home life and work-life balance. But at the same time, I'm really glad that we're able to have a solo interview talking more about your career, some of the things you've done, and especially as that applies to like what we do now, right? And what I mean by that is like, how do we live our best lives and careers? So one enhances the other and really fosters the other, right? So like you're great at work, you're dialed in, you're continuing to up level and improve at work, and that only makes you better at home because we know the converse. We know so often it's a slippery slope of I'm really good here at the detriment or expense there.
Yeah, man, we're oftentimes, especially with police officers, just saving the crumbs, for our families.
Yeah.
We give our best at work, we're busting our butts. And on top of that, just the amount of decision fatigue, all the things that you see.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? But yeah, Shawn, if you could share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what brought you into law enforcement, and tell us a bit about your career.
I was young. I was working in a restaurant at like 18 years old, and my brother had gotten hired with the sheriff's department to work in the jail. And I didn't have anything going for me. I got kicked out of high school and all these other things. And he goes, "Hey, you should come work in the jail." And I was like, "Why in the hell would I want to do that?" And he
Fair
says, "Well,
question.
yeah." He says, "Well, you're working at that restaurant, whatever, they're paying you like $7 an hour. At least over here, I think it was like $12 back then. Plus, you'll get like some benefits and stuff like that." And so I was like, all right. I started working in the jail, or I got the job, started working there, and man, it sucked. I mean, that's another population like in the first responder realm
Yes.
that, man,
Yeah.
they're getting, having a really hard time up in there. And so it was really not a pleasant job. I really felt like I was in jail too, but it did have some really good things about it. So one was you really got to learn how to manage people a lot better. There's just so many there's just a very diverse group of people that are ultimately incarcerated, and they're not
Hmm.
all like, the worst people. And so it kind of gives you like you see things in a different way. Then you also see some really ugly things, but
Hmm.
um, yeah, at the end of the day, it was a really difficult job that had a lot of unknown benefits to it. And the main one that it bleeds over into the actual patrol and policing side that I got involved in. And the only logical move was policing. Although I didn't have like a huge interest in being a police officer, like, well, I'm already a corrections officer. Like maybe that gives me some, cred, to get
Yeah.
hired with an agency. And so ended up doing that. I was a deputy sheriff for a couple of years and just had an absolute blast. I mean, I was like, this is freaking great. And I think there's something about policing your actual community. But I really felt like, no, I want to police my community. So I ended up getting hired down at with the Corpus Christi. That's where I'm at. And then it just blew up from there because it was a much larger department, a lot more opportunity, a lot more training. And so while I was there, I ended up doing a lot of different things. Got involved with SWAT, did that for about 5 years. Did the field training stuff, did a lot of training or teaching rather, at the training academy, and then a bunch of other things. But my main scope that I was involved in was the mental health crisis intervention. I ended up being the full time coordinator of that program essentially, and so that was also a lot of work. I think I just started to see too that, man, there's a lot of effort to teaching officers like how to better help others with their mental health, or how to better help the community and stuff like that. And all that's great and totally necessary, but there isn't a lot for us, as I said earlier. And then I stumbled on this opportunity with Stronger Families, and really just intended to help provide first responders with some of those things that we lack, serving as the director over the first responder programs.
That's legit, man. Well, I love that crash course, and you provided like a real sampling that I made some notes, and I'm going to cut back through because I want to pay attention to a lot of the listeners, and I know that a lot of people come in from varying angles. But I love your shared story, like what brought you in, and it's totally cool because especially me coming out of hiring not so long ago, it's helpful to share like a lot of people that have established law enforcement careers. They didn't have it all quote unquote figured out, right? And a lot of people that come in a lot of times are kind of humble and they're hat in hand. They're like, hey, I've made some mistakes and I'm not super proud of my mistakes I made when I was younger, but like, can I still be a cop? And most of the time they're nothing egregious. Most of the time they're the same things that like my peers or even my bosses, like they'd tell stories when they were a teenager, or the whole rebel kind of thing,
Mm,
troublemaker. A lot of times those people, it could be a cry for help, it could be just like pushing boundaries and really finding confidence, and kind of these prevailing strong personalities, and sometimes lean really well towards the exciting nature and the dynamic nature of law enforcement. So I appreciate you sharing that. And at the same time, when you said that CO note, right, for corrections, like my heart and my head goes out to COs all the time, because so many people in law enforcement get so frustrated with the cyclical nature of what it feels like, the grind, the cynicism, like, am I actually making a difference out here? But we all know, we can collectively know that somebody's got to do the CO job, and it's really a thankless job. I mean, we say law enforcement is thankless, but not anything in comparison to CO work. So, shout out to the COs out there, because I had a peer in academy that said basically what you said. He said one day, he was a supervisor and he had a very established career, but he's like, I just one day kind of had this thought of like, why am I in jail all day and I didn't do anything wrong? And it was that
Mhm.
feeling of imprisonment for himself too.
Yeah, man. It's the COs. It seems as if like there isn't like this. It's not looked at from the optics of virtue like policing is. You know, they're not like out in the community. They have this boundary line that they operate in that is the walls and just a lot of it's not seen. You know, by the
Yeah,
public. I mean, they are quite literally, if they're a good CO, they are mentoring a lot of these people.
yeah,
Like it's amazing. I remember sitting in there, and they would come up. These guys would come up, and they would be asking for advice on anything. Even to this day, because I was a CO in my community here, every now and then I'll still run into these guys, and I never remember them because there were so many of them. But they remember you because they looked at you all day, every day from their cell door or
yeah,
when they were in the day room. They remember you. It's burned into their memory. And so they'll come up to me and they'll be like, "Hey man, what's up?" And I'm like, "Who are you?" You know,
yeah,
they're like,
yeah,
"Hey, I was in 4R or I was in X unit or whatever." And I'm like,
yeah. That's when you're
"Now,
really reading their body language. You're like, okay,
yeah, like,
are
oh,
we
was
about
this
to have
one
an
of
issue
those?"
here? Mm-hmm.
Right. And overwhelmingly, I mean, I haven't had a single one for me that wanted, try to provoke or anything like that. They were always like really positive, like you kind of end up seeing like the other side of like when you were talking about that cyclic thing. I think that can kind of be some of the benefit of being the corrections guy is I think they end up seeing them a lot more at a lot more higher frequency and volume that they spend with these people that the law enforcement officer out in the field just sees it real quick, in and out, in and out, in and out. And then those who are corrections end up getting to kind of build like these relationships with them, and then they'll actually get to see some of the ones that really do change.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, and I'm glad you highlighted that because that absolutely parlays into the rest of our conversations later. But that's something tangible for people coming in or people that are on the street and patrol or COs or probation, right? Everything's an opportunity, and I think that if we remember our younger idealistic selves when we come into this kind of work, we're like, man, I know I can't change the world, but if I can help a couple people, like just turn them the right direction, because you call it my aging or whatever. Am I getting soft? Am I getting sagely? I don't know, but the listener can decide. But ultimately, like we're all humans on this place we call Earth, and we don't get to choose who all we're around. We can kind of select this way or that way. But if we choose this life of service where we're interacting with people that are in really bad spots, like in society, right? They're going through it in the worst way. That's why 911 is called. That's why someone's putting the metal bracelets on. Things didn't go so great. And oftentimes, and this is not to excuse behavior, but oftentimes they didn't have a great hand. And I know there's that defensive nature for those in law enforcement or service are like, well, I didn't either. And I'm like, that's great. Like you either had yourself, whether you did, whether you coaxed yourself through, or most of us can recognize a lot of people that helped us out. And you can be that person. And you might be the only cheerleader that this person, this inmate, this suspect, this defendant has ever had, right? It might have been a whole life of people telling them they weren't good enough. And if I think about the flip of, my daughter's pretty young, she's in grade school now, but I consider if there's other kids in that school that they're not they're not getting hugs and kisses at night. They're not, having supportive conversations about their dreams. They're not being told they're good enough. Like we know how sad that is and what that can lead to. And then we are on the other end way, way, way after the fact. And it's not to say we can really course correct someone completely. It's to say that we have a role and an opportunity there.
So to those that I totally agree with you. To those that maybe see it on the opposite side of that, this whole polarity. On one end, it's hey man, maybe stuff happens, right? Like people maybe sometimes deserve a second chance, right? And then on the other end, it's like letter of the law. What I would say usually is really those that are kind of looking at it from that angle are also the overly emotional individuals. They're taking it personal,
Mm-hmm.
and how many times so I'd be willing to bet this is the case for you. You were just doing your job. You understand, like, hey, you probably maybe had some things happen. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you're just a fool. I don't know, but I'm just doing my job. This isn't
Yeah.
personal. And I want to see you succeed. I want to see you get out of this. Like you're looking at them through that positive lens. You probably had a lot of people that when you rolled up to the jail, the detention center, they said, hey, Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for being cool. Thanks for like seeing me or like hearing me out. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I, at full admission, like I like to focus on this because I know how it can seem like, oh, you're an administrator. What do you remember? What do you know? Like, no, I had hordes, like plenty of times I was not, right? I had plenty of times I took it emotionally. One, you're doing drugs and you're stealing stuff, so you're a bad person. That was a lot of my early career. And then even it still is something that I have to check even as a supervisor, right? As a patrol sergeant, you fought my guys and now you're making a complaint. Like I'm pretty curt, I'm pretty sarcastic at times, and I'm not really the most professional in those prior years, right? Now, if I even happen to go to the scene and they're complaining about my sergeant and they did this and that and they fought and they ran, like I take it personally too. Those are my people you try to hurt. At the same time, I know, hey, maybe like it's that self-awareness. Like, I'm not going to have this conversation right now. I'm just going to see what my sarge needs. We can deal with the complaint process later. Like I can talk to them when they're calmer, or that whole thing of I suppose self-awareness to be like, okay, what is this going to advance? Is arguing going to convince anyone of the situation being different, and is even helpful to myself or my team right now? And a lot of times with the emotions running high, yeah, the answer is oftentimes not.
Yeah, I would say for the listeners, like none of what we're saying is to say like you should be totally stoic all the time,
Sure.
regardless
Yeah.
of what happened, or if somebody tried to hurt you or your partner. I mean, that's like totally reasonable. That would be absolutely, you'd be a robot. You might as well be
Yeah. And
you
that's
might as well be a chat GPT, right?
right. No, that's really helpful to discern. And like we oftentimes I think that sometimes the most cynical officers are oftentimes the most emotional in the ways that they are so passionate. And that's where their emotions are now steering this way. And their attitude, unfortunately, has gone this direction that's not serving them. Like, they truly feel like this doesn't matter. And then they're kind of, you know, they're pounding their fists and they're so frustrated. Like, they're bringing that stuff home too, and we'll get to that part of the conversation later. But it's not to say you don't have a right to be frustrated. It's not to say it's not understandable, but it is to say if you've gone so far where you can't say anything constructive, like is that truly benefiting anyone? And even the flip is you have to recognize it's hurting you. It's hurting the people around you, and that's where we need to get, I suppose, more resilient and more constructive as an industry when we talk about the impact of mental health and these stressors that are all intertwined.
Negativity spreads like the plague.
Yeah.
Uh, and it really does take, in my opinion, it takes equal amounts of positivity to cancel out negativity.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not to beat ourselves up. It's to be aware that these dynamics are having an influence, and then do things we can to kind of course correct. I love how you said, hey, if you have that negativity on the crew, you got to bring that positivity. And I've even heard a study that was, as far as like the contagious nature of stuff, they tracked like more contagious negativity than positivity. So my flip to that is like, man, if you feel like you're that positive person or you want to be, but it's so pervasive in your, in your roll call or your squad meetings where that one person literally all they got to do is walk in the room and everyone's tanked. Like, you got to bring it extra, and maybe not like overtly. Maybe it is pulling aside the people that are coachable, or pulling aside the Sarge and saying, hey, I've noticed, Sarge, like I want briefings to be productive. I'm trying to think of ways to do that. And, most good Sarges would be like, yeah, I want that too. What do you got? Like, well, maybe what about if we have a structure, we have a schedule, and we kind of, everyone has something that they're bringing. So there's more of like an agenda. And if you didn't make it on the agenda, you don't get to just throw your hand up and just start, bitching about the call that happened yesterday and then sink everyone as they're about to go be motivated out on the street. Like, you can inject these ideas, and then, you take those people when they're out and about, and you have this plan, and let's go, hey, I heard this store is getting really, really saturated with people like ruining their business, stealing and smoking out back. Like, let's go try to show up for that business owner, right? So then you just kind of start breeding these little pockets of purpose, and hopefully, I think most of the time, like, people will glom onto that. Like, the right people will lean in, and then the other people, they can either get on board or they can kind of, sequester themselves and put themselves in the corner, and that's where they'll be. Like, we'll be ready for them when they turn around. We're not going to cut them off, but we're also not going to just put them on a pedestal just because.
As they used to say, idle hands are the devil's playground.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're just sitting there with nothing to talk about, it's going to get ugly. People are going to start talking about negative things. We're really good as human beings to look for negative things. It's a protective factor. And so once you list out all the ways to have the absolute worst briefing room experience, then you just say, how do I do the opposite of that?
Yeah, how do I build
You
that
know,
so it doesn't happen?
right.
I like that. Does any of that kind of reverse engineering or problem solving come from your time on either the SWAT team or when you're building curriculum in academy? Like those are things I want to nod to and see what your lessons learned there were.
You know who Charlie Munger is?
Yeah.
So Charlie Munger, he calls it inverse training,
Mm,
and just kind of discussing the idea that we're always looking for the solutions, but sometimes it's kind of best to like how do we look at things as if like what is the if here's let me use another example to kind of further explain this. If let's say you're in a relationship, you're in a marriage or something like that, and you want to improve your dating experience. So I could sit there and I could say, okay, I'm going to I'm going to do X, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and you're trying to build the ultimate dating experience. But maybe before you do that, like, how can I write out what would be the if I wanted to make the worst dating experience? So
mm,
then, after you've written all that down, you know that those are all the things not to do. Then you can start to look at the things to do. I would say, yeah. I mean, even like when we were doing the SWAT, we're doing like an ops plan and stuff like that. That was one of the things we would think about. We would just frame it in a different way. Like we would
mm-hmm.
essentially, what are the contingencies and what are all the things that could go wrong? Um, but we didn't usually say if we wanted to build the worst operation, how would we do it?
Sure.
That kind of came a little bit later in life
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And I like that. I like that prompt because either way, whether you're contingency planning on an op or whether you're doing this thought exercise, like really what you're focusing and you're underlining is like pattern recognition. And
Mhm.
it's as soon as we identify those things, and a lot of us, we have it subconsciously, we're picking up these things. That's what makes us uncomfortable when this call is going this way. We get the spidey sense. But when we can put vocabulary and actual terms to it, right? Like, oh, that person isn't just making me uncomfortable. They keep blading away and I can't see their hands and their pockets are bulgy. Those could be weapons coming out of the out of the pockets pretty soon. Like that's where the training now teaches us, why are we so concerned? Why do I have this chill on the back of my spine? And then how do I remove that chill? Well, I can move to a better position behind cover and address the threat, right? I can draw a weapon and challenge them. Like these things start to make me feel better, like I have more control over these, contingencies that may happen. And this might be a jump, but I'm wondering if, we're framing that kind of talking. And, you brought it up earlier, right? When we go home and the hypervigilance that occurs at home, right? My teenager's talking to me this way. Shoot, I might not recognize it in the moment, but because they're talking to me that way and the tone is a certain way, it reminds me of when the teenager last week was talking to me a certain way before they lied to me and then ran away because they had all these warrants. What I want to get people thinking about is like how we don't discern that in times of stress, and our bodies and our brains, our emotions are starting to treat everything like the same type of stressor that we may be encountering at work.
Yeah, that's a when we look at wellness, when we talk about police officer wellness, or it is a very general term. Wellness,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you got financial wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness. I mean, the list just goes on, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing that matters most to me is my friends, my family, my coworkers.
100%. Yeah.
That's where I think we're really missing the mark in as it relates to like wellness and peer support programs and stuff like that. Is we focus a lot on, and this is totally needed. I'm not saying this all needs to go away, but we focus a lot on intervention and reactive based programs. Like CISM, right? That'd be a good example. I mean, totally
Sure.
necessary, should not go
Reactive,
anywhere,
right. Mm-hmm.
but it is inherently reactive, and a lot of peer support teams are essentially reactive or intervention based only. Someone kind of comes
Yeah.
forward and says, "Hey, man, I think Shawn is looking for the answers at the bottom of a bottle or something," and then okay, we're going to intervene. We're going to react to that, that kind of stimulus. But there's not a lot of proactiveness in how we're addressed. There will be some, but it'll typically look like this. the peer support or whatever unit kind of goes to a briefing room or injects themselves into in-service training and says, hey guys, don't forget that we're here and we need to talk about it. And don't forget that we're here and we need to talk about it. And it'll kind of just be that same kind of thing.
Hmm.
And instead, if you could then instead inject some different curriculums, maybe more focused on what the majority says is most important, which are relationships. Because when we're talking about what is the biggest protective factor that somebody has when they ultimately get involved in a critical incident, it is going to be the relationships in their life. That is the biggest protective and supportive factor that somebody has.
Yeah.
We focus a lot on creating access to care, creating access to services and stuff like that. But no matter how much access you create, generally, someone doesn't access it on their own. It's usually someone that cares about them holding their hand and saying,
Mm-hmm.
let's do this together. And so, but when relationships have dissolved or they have become so disconnected, they don't even see that a problem is there because it's not observable. The person's not even displaying it, or they don't even have enough information to know that there's a problem going on. But two, even if they did know there was a problem going on, they may not be willing or open to the idea of saying, hey, let's walk through this together, kind of thing, because the relationship's not strong. A lot of peer support and CISM and wellness teams should kind of look at that, like start to look at, keep doing the mental health stuff, the physical health stuff, the financial stuff, all those different things, but really start focusing on what the majority says is most important. My relationships are struggling, my
Mm-hmm.
family life, my relationships at work, and ultimately ask yourself when somebody gets involved in, um, a critical incident or they got something going on, how much more resilient are they going to be if you just have, the CISM model or whatever model that you're using? How much more resilient is a person going to be that has the strong relationships in their life?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I would think they would be. I would like to see a study on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, man, I think you nailed it, because so often we invest, and I'll dare say overinvest in this job. And part of the success of this job is people that are willing to and have to, right? It is a prevailing identity because it is more than a job. It's, if you're going to be successful, it is your lifestyle. It affects a lot of things. It's going to be a different reaction to family when you're late because something happened than if something happened at the office and you didn't miss a deadline. It's just, it translates differently, and it translates just like you said at the grocery store when you're eyeballing everyone and who's going to jack the store, or and on and on. Like, I've had those thoughts and feelings, and I try to be better about keeping them in check, but sometimes they get the better of me, and the car comes down my dead end neighborhood, and I'm just like, it's fine, it's fine. And then I'm like, what if it's not? Okay, what is it? And it's someone looking at my my police rig, but maybe none of those things, right? And so it becomes a different struggle. But at the end of the day, even with all that said, what does everyone do that for, and what is the most important thing in everyone's life? And I do think that everyone I've ever heard answer that question has said family, regardless of their assignment, regardless of their time on, regardless of what their career goals are, or whether they have a healthy relationship with work or an unhealthy relationship with work, whether they overwork, whether they're unplugged. It's always family. And the couple times I hear someone put something else out of order, they quickly tie it back into family, right? So, shout out to Ken Henson. I was just listening to an older episode. I think it was 60, but I was listening to that. He was my academy instructor, and I texted him recently. I was like, man, like I said, a whole lot more. I'm getting better at the show, that kind of thing. He's like, dude, you're great. But he actually plugged it as, he puts mental health first but right away, right? Almost like the same breath. He said, because you affect your family with your mental health. And I love how you framed it, because yes, resources are critical and important. We need to keep building those and improving access. But the improving access only highlights the fact that those resources aren't with you. They're not in your home. It's trying to streamline quicker scheduling, more access, more availability, more quality resources. But what you are left with, is who's in your home and who's at your work, who's who's texting you, checking in, who's not, right? And that's your relationships. That's all the people in your life. And that's all the people that you can be in their lives too. So, no, I really appreciate you putting it out that way.
Yeah, if you generally, and it depends on how the question is asked, right? Like, so the way I frame it is, what is most important to you?
Mm,
That simple. Now, a lot of those things like physical fitness, financial health, mental health, they're all supportive of that one thing that is most important. So while I agree that all those things have, you know, you definitely need to be focusing on those too, with like a level of intentionality.
yeah.
If all these other things had to just go to crap basically, but you could save one, which one would it be?
Yeah.
My friends, my family, and my coworkers. Like I
Hmm.
want that in my life.
And it's really hard because they are intertwined. And as one improves, generally, if you do it the right way, they all improve, right? So they all kind of help up level. But, for myself, I mean, you're a guy clearly lifts, but that wasn't always, you take care of yourself. So that wasn't always my thing, as far as like physical fitness and athleticism. It became a passion of mine in the job because I wanted to do the job better. And so I learned what that took. And so if you asked a younger me, what is the most important part of health? I would probably say physical health because I I recognize a strong body equated a strong mind for myself. But as I get older and I'm around older circles, I'm like, man, your body's going to go one day. So my job is to preserve it as best I can. But I think ultimately seeing people unfortunately lose their minds, like one of the saddest things I've seen at work or in personal circles is when people lose their awareness, right? Alzheimer's, dementia. So I'm like, man, it's the mind, but it's chicken or egg. Like both of these things, you want to preserve them the best you can because you want to show up for the people you care about the best you can. And that is back to family, right? And so I think that it's a really meaningful exercise if you write down how you'd rank them and why, and really like what is your important purpose. And a lot of times it comes to legacy, and what that looks like might be different for people, but it could be a daunting exercise. It was for me, but once I put down these things, like, I want to show up the best way I can for my daughter. So it helps me to write that down and reference that back because I was looking at a potential contracting opportunity in addition to my work. So people don't need to start rumors like I was leaving. But looking at this additional thing I could do on the side. But ultimately, where I was at in life, and it would take away time and bandwidth for my kid and in some ways my work, I was like, no, it just really exciting opportunity. Just the timing isn't right. And it's okay. And I feel really good about walking away from that because of my compass.
Mhm. Yeah, if you know, you, if you improve one, some of the others improve. But the difference is that what is the level of impact of it in all the different ways. So like if you make more money, there's a chance that maybe you are a little bit happier. There's also a chance that maybe you're sadder.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a chance that you might be able to have better relationships even with family because now you can go on more vacations or you can do more things, but it's not always going to translate like that, right? And so another way to look at this is, what should you focus on first? Should you focus on your physical health first or your mental health first? Some will say, well, focus on your mental health first and then address your physical health. Others will say if you address your physical health, you just start get moving. A lot of the endorphins and other positive things, you start looking better, you're feeling
Yeah.
better about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately results in different mental health. And so like a lot of these are they are totally interrelated. But when I look at the relationship component, and you also look at how does this affect an agency on a team level, but also like productivity, absentee rates, retention, burnout, and all these kinds of things. I think there's a lot of guys they're not showing up to work because they got something going on at home. It may not be that they're sick or ill, but there's a problem that needs to be addressed at home, and it's a relationship problem. A lot of officers aren't coming to work or wanting to come to work because they don't get along with the people on their shift. If you improve those relationships, I think you'd see a much higher level of productivity and less burnout and less absentees, better retention. If the relationship between leadership and, your boots on the ground is good. And sometimes too, I would even wonder that now I think most agencies really do need to hire more officers.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
like, there's so many calls. Like, how do we handle all
Mm-hmm.
these calls? But then again, sometimes it makes you wonder because you know for sure there are those who, they're on the job and they're sitting there, watching Netflix while the calls are pending. you
Mm-hmm.
know, and is it just also because they're so burnt out? They don't give a fork, don't give a fudge anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you improve those relationships, I think you start to see a lot less of that. And maybe even some agencies might be like, well, maybe we didn't need to actually hire, or maybe we don't need to actually hire that many more people to manage this issue.
Quality over quantity, and like quality of relationships. I love how you gave a nod to leadership, because that's always an opportunity. Like, whether some leaders oftentimes feel like bosses or management, and what is their bottom line? And is their bottom line, like, happiness and contentment from the citizenry and their constituents, for the mayor and all these things? Like, if so, then it still behooves you to support and build that relationship with your officers, because that will trickle down and translate to how they interact with the community. Like, I don't know if there's a study on it, talk about like studies we need, but it's almost like, I think enough of the right leaders believe that to be true, so they invest in it the right way. And for others, we need to keep convincing them and show where it works. And I mean, you can look around. Every region, I'm sure, has a struggling department, or struggling departments, more likely, and then some that don't seem to need all the bells and whistles. They might not be the highest paid. They might not have the best signing bonus, but retention seems pretty good, and recruiting's not that big of a struggle, and people are genuinely happy, and they have good things to say about the captain, about the chief, about whatever. Start asking questions, start being curious, like, hey, what are you doing? What does that look like? What can we bring back? So no, I love that connection back, man.
You see this probably more in larger departments, but they start to miss the personal aspect of that relationship with their staff. You know, they'll start to just strictly look at data. You know, how many traffic stops did you get in? How many, arrests did you make? Like, how many calls did you take, and so on. And then when we start to kind of take a step back and look at the diversity of the personnel that we have now, I mean, we have in in law enforcement a very large generational gap. It wasn't always like this. They didn't pump out academy after academy after academy because retention used to be a lot better, and so now it's one after the other, and so you got guys that have they're in they're 21 years old, and then you got the guy that's 55 years old still on the force, and so the leadership is often all kind of in between there, but they may not know how to appeal to the 55-year-old, how to appeal to the 21-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
and really, like, you've probably heard of like the five love languages
Yep.
as it relates to like romantic relationships. But from the work sense, I look at it. Well, we have a curriculum called Workplace Appreciation Styles, and so, like, how are you even showing your staff that you appreciate?
Yep.
And it's different, just like the five love languages for the romantic relationships. It's different in the workplace of how somebody likes to be shown appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it's some people, again, just like it mirrors that, but the five love languages, but some people appreciate quality time, and like maybe this staff member, like every now and then I need to just try and say, hey, let's go get a coffee together.
Yeah.
Maybe another one really appreciates accolades or something like that,
Yep.
and so
Gifts. Yeah.
gifts or something, and,
Yeah.
and learning those kinds of things about the staff can really improve leadership's relationship with them. And then ultimately, those who are supposed to be following leadership, if they have a good relationship with them, are going to follow better. That's just the way things go. If you don't feel appreciated, you ain't following. You're going to do the
Yeah.
exact opposite.
Yeah. And for anyone listening that has been under a rock, like, check out the five love languages. It's very shattering, like, and it's like a light bulb once you realize that it's not just for your significant other, but it's for every relationship, right? Or you've outlined that so well, right? Because you could be a sarge out there being like, I literally tell my guys every single day, or I tell this officer every single day how much I appreciate the work he or she does. But if they're not a words of affirmation person, if they're in acts of service and being like, if you appreciate me, why aren't you approving my leave or approving my training or coming to back me on this call? Acts of
Yeah,
service person, right? So, like, and huge thing for me and my now wife, even when we talked over things, and it was like a huge light bulb for me when we were dating. And I'm like, I'm an acts of service, she's words of affirmation. So I'm like, you need me to tell you? And she's like, yeah, I want you to tell me, like, and not just like you're great, but like, why? What did I do that's, fantastic? We're all wired differently. And so it's fantastic when we recognize the opportunities there and how we might just literally be speaking the wrong language, and then just not getting the appreciation or receiving it the way that we ought to. I mean, you gave a nod to that. I do want to ask you more about Stronger Families and what is the goal of Stronger Families and all the different resources and things that you all put on.
Yeah, for sure. So we're a nonprofit that essentially the mission is to help build stronger relationships, or help first responders, military and veterans build stronger relationships, so that they can thrive, both professionally and on a personal level. And I'll get to the three things that we do. I guess I'll start now, but I do want to tell you about the first one in particular because we, as you said, you're like, man, I've heard a lot about Stronger Families, and why is that? Because you're in the Washington area. Well, we have a large just like network in Washington, and we do a lot of things up there. And in fact, I got a lot of things coming up there, but this isn't yet published on the website. But in June, we're planning to do a first responder couples retreat in Bellevue, and I hope that you can come.
Nice.
I hope that you and your
You've
wife
done
can
it
come.
before, right? Like downtown
Oh,
Bellevue.
yeah, we've done them in Bellevue in the past. We have before I came on, and we do them kind of all over the United States. And so the three things that we do is, one is we do the couples retreats because, as you know, divorce rates in law enforcement, all the first responders is way higher than the general population. I think the rate is going to stay the same. I think we're going to see less divorces. So the percentage is going to stay the same of divorces that occur, but I think we're going to see less divorces because less people are getting married these days.
Mm-hmm.
We might even see an increase in the divorce rate, but yeah, so we do couples retreats, and so that's a 2-day event for the first responders to kind of get away from everything, but really take some time to spend together and go over some really beneficial curriculum together about resolving conflict. Like, how do you forgive each other, for some of the things that you may have been through as a result of the job or other. We even go into detail on like these like problem solving, and it's all like interactive. So it's not like death by PowerPoint kind of thing. There's like an
Yeah.
entire booklet that you're working through together, and there's breakout sessions. And then it includes like a night stay in the hotel and meals and all that kind of stuff. But we'll even get culturally competent, either licensed professional counselors or marriage and family therapists from the area to kind of provide, it's optional, but to kind of provide some one-on-one coaching with the couple so they can sign up for that while they're there or prior to the event as well. And so we do the couples retreats. The other two things that we do for first responders is we'll come into an agency and provide department wellness training, but it is all specifically focused on improving relationships in and out of the workplace. Don't get me wrong, there is some interplay with like mental health and stress management, those kinds of things, because all those affect relationships. But it is essentially a one-time event unless the agency has us back. And so the next tier to that is we can actually certify people within an agency to have access to our dashboard that has our PowerPoints, has our curriculums. Hey, leadership, let's do workplace appreciation styles this year. The detectives in patrol are not communicating well. Let's do the communication curriculum, and so on, right?
Yeah.
And so those are really the three things that we do for law enforcement or first responders.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for breaking that down in such a systematic way. And I've heard so many good things from people I personally know about the couples retreat. And it's also fantastic to hear about the relationship focus on departmental training, right? Because I think if we're all honest with ourselves, I'm such a proponent of introducing different wellness concepts and modalities, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to be a team and enhance the team and workability, right? And we are all people. We focused on that for the majority of the conversation. It's like people helping people, right? We're first responders for the betterment and service to people. And we're all a bunch of personalities, and we all got our stuff, and we're all in the same building or precincts or what have you, trying to do the best we can. And there's rank, there's all these complications, there's cultural dynamics, there's drama. So how do you iron all that out and build team cohesion? Like, shoot, it's relationship, it's communication, it's building trust, which is really what relationships are grounded in. So I love that concept. I'm excited to learn more. And I want to be mindful of your time. And I know that we could nerd out and talk about so much more about your career for multiple hours, and probably have to have you back. But if you do have a few minutes, I'd like to kind of ask about, a theme that comes up in this show a lot, which is moving outside and transitioning out of active law enforcement. And clearly you're still tied so much to the culture, military first responder culture, and serving families where it really counts. But what was that transition like? And is it something that you're still feeling out, and any opportunities or challenges that you would share with the listeners there?
So the main thing for me in that regard is a lot of what I do is I work from home. Like right now, obviously I'm at home. So I struggle with that for me on an internal level. Like oftentimes I'll have to go work at a coffee shop or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
With the way we operate is we kind of work from home, but then we travel to these different locations where we're putting on a retreat or providing some department training. And so that has been a struggle, for me, just that transition of not driving around all day and meeting people, kind of thing. But on a more general sense, let me know if I cut out because these things are starting to get a little dead.
Yeah.
On a more general sense, I think when guys and gals are leaving law enforcement, one of the it's definitely okay to like take some time to like just kind of take some time off like entirely, like you retire or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and maybe you take 6 months off or something. But I think you get so entrenched in this culture that if you can find a way to stay somewhat engaged in it, maybe that's through your association or through your maybe through a nonprofit or something like that. I think that's really going to offset a lot of the negative things because let's be real, when you leave, it's kind of like when I got off SWAT. That was another thing. You're either SWAT or you're not, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, as soon as I left, I mean, all the guys, man, it was great, kind of thing. But you don't really hear from them after that.
Yeah.
The same thing happens when you leave law enforcement.
Yeah.
You're not going to hear from everybody like you would hope. You might have a couple, that you stayed really close to, but the reality is a lot of friendships are built on and sustained based on utility. And when the utility is gone, you realize, oh well, that friendship was really only based on that thing, and that thing isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can still have those other utility based relationships if you engage in maybe like some type of nonprofit that's associated with first responders. Um, but outside of that too, I would just say like keep doing stuff. Even if it like I like to think, I used to like to think like when I retired, like I would probably go back to actually working in a restaurant just for poker money,
Yeah.
or something
Yeah.
because I actually enjoyed it. I thought working in a restaurant was fun. Um, and so I think there's a lot of difficulty in transitioning, but if you're proactive in how you transition, the different things that you ultimately get involved in, sense of purpose now kind of thing, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what it all comes down to with overwhelmingly, it's when you lose your sense of purpose, that is when you've lost your sense of self.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. And I think that it is something that is, again, the more first responders take care of themselves and their families and their own personal wellness, the better off they're going to be, the better cop they'll be, the better firefighter they'll be, jailer, right? What have you. And then also the better they're going to be with any type of transition, right? Hardship, but also just like lifestyle change. Maybe you move, like you're going to be more resilient. And then when ultimately one day you leave the career, which all of us will have to at some point, you're going to be more ready for it. It's not to say it won't be easy. Um, or it's not to say it will be easy. And I like how you put that out, which is like, hey, you're off the team. You don't hear from people a whole lot. And it's not personal. It's like people are just busy and they do their thing. So when you say it's like relationship of utility, and a lot of people might get really almost distraught when they hear that or they think about it, but let's face it, like it's not like people are intentionally trying to cut you out, but life goes on in the busyness of the thing, and the machine of work, right? When you leave one day, and a lot of folks have spoken on that on the show, Scott Medlin being one, and some more recent conversations, um, with JT from Survive Policing and all that, but it just happens. And so what are you doing? What other pieces of you do you build an identity, purpose, like, right? Like those are huge things that you can do to mitigate that. So I really do appreciate you sharing that, man. Well, Shawn, if you could, thank you so much for your time, but if you could let the listeners know where they can find out more about you, get in contact, and or how they can find out about Stronger Families.
Yeah, for sure. So they can just go to strongerfamilies.org or .com. We have both those domains. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. We're here for anybody that wants to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing your insight, your experience, and everything you're working on, man.
I appreciate you having me on. And if you want to do it again sometime, let me know. This is really, really a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.